Very happy to have you all here. This is our Ataya seminar, actually the second session of our Ataya seminar for this semester. My name is Azza Mustafa Babikir Ahmed. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at HUMA. And our guest for today is Marcelo Rosa. Marcelo Rosa is a professor of sociology in the program of social science in development, agriculture and society at the Rio de Janeiro Federal Rural University in Brazil. He is also the coordinator of the research laboratory on the non-explanatory sociology. From 2018 to 2022, he was the head of the sociology at the Brazilian Agency for Higher Education and Graduate Studies. In the last 3 decades, Professor Rosa has conducted research on projects on landless social movements in Brazil and South Africa. These projects have evolved into a long-term project on how lives in and with land in southern countries challenge current hegemony or hegemonic Euro-American theories in the social sciences. So his talk today is on a book project which is addressing the limits of the social sciences in dealing with other than modern subjects. So the talk is titled Ontoformativity, so it's like onto from ontology, ontological politics, lands, struggles, and theoretical challenges for social sciences. So without further ado, I'm going to give you the platform, Marcelo, and let's hear. You have 30 minutes, and then we'll have after that discussion. Yeah. So, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Azza, for the presentation. Thank you, Divine, for the invitation, and all colleagues from HUMA for the warm reception that we had here. What I would like to present today is part of my sabbatical project that I'm going to spend a year here as a research fellow, trying to, and that's I'll try to present you what is my proposal for the year, for the whole year. So some of the issues here and the things I will present to you, some of them are very clear to me, and most of them are not yet, because I still have to work on them and to write on them. And I will really appreciate all your inputs, critiques, and discussions for today. So this presentation comes out of, I think it was clear in the presentation, but it has been 20 years of research in South Africa. And 21 years of teaching sociology in Brazil at public universities. So, both things, they run in parallel for a long time. And I always like to say that because I think, especially for the ones who are, and I like to apologize because this is a really academic issue that I'm trying to deal with, and most of my concern deals with the limits of the academic life to deal with the lives of the people we work with in our researches and even in our political struggles. And my concern is to address the limitations of our work as academics in dealing with struggles, and the example today will be the land, and the issue is the land struggle. But my whole concern with this book is that I've done research with rural people in Brazil for a long time, and with rural people in South Africa for 20 years now. And these people, they have always a subaltern place in our theories, methodologies, and even in our political concerns. The rural is something that will always be, sorry for the long introduction, but as I come from a field called agrarian studies, and there is the agrarian question and the land question. But as if these questions had to be solved in order to the capitalist and modern society to get developed, to be developed. And that's my main critical concern. How come we conceive the existence of certain people in the world as a merely problem to be solved in order to allow another form of, and that's my problem, better modern existence. So this is the draft book of my book, and the book has 3 parts, and I try to present all the book in 15 minutes now. And the first part of the book addresses the ontological foundations of the social theory. And my whole issue is that, and I'm not talking about specifically, but it's mostly about sociology, but it can be social anthropology, politics, that our ontological foundations are basically modern. And they defend and they take the modern as sorry for my poor English sometimes, but for the guidelines of our research, to guide our research. The modern life is the guide, and the difference to modern life makes the others exist. The second part of the book addresses what I've been calling ontoformative theories, that are theories that have been developed, but they are not taken as social theories. They are, and my example here will be, and it's very important in my own formation, feminist theories. Feminist theories are not taken in social theory courses, at least in most of the countries I've been to. There is always a course on feminist theory. And that theory must deal with feminist issue. Women, not only gender, but women, but not social theory. And the third is, with my research here, how can we make people and people that are involved in land struggles exist otherwise in these modern narratives. So I'll try to be to use my time and be very straight, and then we can talk later. You can ask me questions. But ontoformativity, and that's the title. And what's the problem with the idea of ontoformativity? I will explain later. But social theory is embedded into ontology. So social theory designates what exists and what deserves to exist in our research, in our talks, and in our politics. All theories, and my point is, almost all theories we have, known as social theories, they discipline our connections, and they are responsible to delineate our global subjects and objects, and that's what brings us together. The capacity of certain theories to make things exist and to hide many other things that people live, especially in the global south, that are not accountable in social theory. And of course, it takes us to classification and limitation. So, and I've been frustrated with my own teaching in social sciences for 20 years, that what I do in my classes with my students most of the time is to tell them what can exist in theory, and they must produce dissertations, theses from the subjects that are already legitimate in the theories that are consecrated in the sociological work, congresses, publications, and these things. And of course, and we have been discussing here these things, but this is, of course, a matter of colonial capture. So, because the theories we read, and most of the theories that organize the thinking in social sciences, were made, and they still belong to the global north. And the global south comes always as an example, and most of the time as a bad example, as difference. And that's my thing, that our research intellectuals in the global south are always made captive in the modern ontology. We must always refer to something modern to be different. We have our own thing from the thing you already have. And we always our subjects, and I try to get there, they are always dependent. And what's the problem with because connecting theory and research? I think most of the PhD students here, they are facing these issues, but depending on the theory we choose, that theory, you delineate the methods we're going to have to investigate the social reality. And of course, nothing that comes different from that theory would be tested or can be tested in our research, because most of you have to prove that you are a social anthropologist. I have to prove I'm a professor of sociology, political scientist. And it means that we must talk about the same things. But who creates this sameness? And that's my thing. Sameness is colonial. And it creates what's relevant, and relevant to whom? And then at the end of this slide, yes, of course, most of the time, and I've done that for 20 years in Brazil. It's relevant to get degrees, to get jobs, but it's not relevant to the lives of the people we work with. And this is what I mean borrowing from, of course, there's this colleagues, I'm not mentioning because of the time, but that developed this idea of ontological politics, that is the politics of what exists and what do not exist in our sociological or the social sciences world. And my point is, theory is hierarchization. And we have always, what is the hegemonic thing? There's always the hegemonic and the dependent. And the hegemonic is coherent, stable, and controlling. And most of our subjects here in the global south, they are what I call dependent ontologists, because they are described, because we don't have any other tools, and we have to compare, incoherent, unstable, and victims. It's easy to describe, in my case, landless as victims. Women, and that's the two issues, and there must be other issues, but it can be like intersectional things, but the only way we have to deal with these things is to promote our subjects as victims. And I'll get there later, I hope. And this is what another colleague from Philippines has called the Ataya, politics of coding. So basically, the academic life is to code other people's life in a way that the Western world and the colonial world can deal with that without being displaced. And that's my point. In teaching sociology, what I've been doing for 20 years, as I said, I've been reinforcing my peripheral position and the peripheral position of my own subjects in theory, because they are always dependent on other theories, and they're always comparable to, or they must be comparable, because we must translate them in something that the disciplines we want to set. I always make these jokes, but I'm only doing this because I have a tenure position in Brazil. So I won't get fired from my university because I'm saying that. Of course, it's not easy when you are looking for a job, when you are trying to position yourself with a certain field. And I apologize for that, but I hope we can work together in these things. But and my whole point here is I must say, I just saw her book at Dulce's shelves the other day. This Denise Ferreira da Silva, this colleague, whose surname is there, is a Black Brazilian author that I taught sociology for almost 20 years in Brazil. I didn't know her. She went to the US, she built her career there, and she wrote the most wonderful critique of the social sciences I've ever read in Brazil. And of course, it's a racial critique, the racial limits of our social sciences. But her main point is that what the social sciences they are looking for a self-determined subject, subjects that ideally or ideally determine themselves. And who are the good examples of the self-determination? Always Western model subjects, because they use reason and in history to basically to dominate not only others, but themselves. So self-controlling people. It's wonderful when you have this very self-controlled people. They talk at the right times. They give lectures in the right time. They teach with the right codings, and that's I think the nice environment and the controlled environment that the reason brings to us. So the idea of ontoformativity and being very clear here, I borrowed from the Australian sociologist Ray Kano that wrote a book on Southern theories. And for Kano, ontoformativity always happens in the world, and I completely agree with that. And her examples are from the colonial encounters. The colonial encounters, they haven't just reproduce the classic, where I was, of course, as an agrarian scholar, the Marxist tradition was always behind my own formation. And the existence and the social life is always changed by the transformation of the people, and of course for Kano, the transformation that occurs after the colonial encounter. So the Southern proletarians are not the same proletarians that we had in the North. But of course, because Kano is a sociologist, she's interested in the proletarians, in certain kind of gender bodies. I agree with her that social life is always producing new forms of existences. Our bodies, they change, our genders change, our racial connections change, our identities change all the time. But in the social sciences, it takes too long. And my point here is to say that we should bring this ontoformativity into the social sciences, not only to say in the world people are like this, but in the social sciences we have to translate them as, at my silly example, as proletarians. What I'm suggesting, and I hope I've been developing this a bit, is we should in social sciences develop what I've been calling ontoformative gestures. And the question is, can we do otherwise? Can we construct and can we do research to change our own subjects? Is it possible for us to research a subject and to get funding for that, and later end up changing the subject we began? Of course, we always began with a certain legitimate subject, but I would say 99% of the case, I'm always taking my case, we begin and we end up with the same subjects because we have to be disciplined. And my proposal here is that every research should assemble analytical ontologies to move theory forward. And my problem is not that we have the proletarian theory, the proletariat theory, but that we should always move forward that theory and not always getting back to the same theories. It can be culture and every definition we have. And of course, as I mentioned, my research group in Brazil, my laboratory is called non-exemplary sociology. And I only, 90% of the time, I only supervise students whose subjects do not fit in the theories we teach. And the whole work of the dissertation is to create a better subject. But that, of course, it requires a certain relation with theory and a challenge to theory. I'm moving fast now. From where my inspirations come from. And around 2014, I was really upset with sociology. I had a very nice position in a very wonderful department of sociology in Brazil. I decided I then created this course called Emergent Social Theories. And I got to collect theories that were not taught in courses, in theory courses, political science, anthropology, and sociology. And of course, as the example I brought here, there were other theories, but the examples I brought here was called by then the third world feminists. That were basically, and of course, most of you know, the third world feminists basically they challenged the theories behind the feminist theories. Theories of gender, bodies, and it produced an effect in the gender debates. But it was never incorporated into the global social science, in the disciplines at all. The feminist theories have changed a lot. But of course, first of all, there's a hierarchization here. Most of the authors, I didn't refer to that, but I did this research before, we cite are men, and men from the global north, white men most of the time. Feminist theories do not, you barely find a man. And I don't know if you can mention a man in feminist theory. And that's the challenge, because men, they don't want to deal with these things. So, no, women, you can have your own theories. Queer, you can have your own theory, but it's not global because it's not masculine enough, let's say. And my point is, some theories that they have make women exist otherwise from the way I've learned, at least. I'm just bringing a few examples here, but these ones I've taught too much of the books and writings. And of course, Oyeronke, the other day you mentioned her, and I think she has been an inspiration to a lot of people. Because she challenges this Western domination, and I won't get into details here, but Sylvia Kusikanki does the same. Gloria Sodua did the same, and Denise Ferreira da Silva that I mentioned here does the same. And of course, I won't get into the concepts I hope to develop. They are developed. This is already written in this part of the book, I hope. But they have developed concepts that make women exist otherwise. And my whole point here is make women, especially, and all of them are indigenous and Black women. And that's a very important point. They exist otherwise. And my whole point is they do not exist as victims only. They are agents. They have agency. They change the world. And they change our own research subjects. There is another part of the book that I won't mention here, but that's the Yoruba inspired debates. That's my old slides. There's an error here, but I want to mention this because I won't have time. I'll get to the land struggles now, and I will hope to finish soon. I got to South Africa, as I said in one of our meetings here 20 years ago, to translate for the Brazilian landless movement. To translate the meetings with the South African landless people movement by then. And since then, I've been doing research here with the ones who were members of that movement, which most of them reside in KwaZulu-Natal and part of them in Mpumalanga. And just for the ones who are not into this debates in South Africa, there are three types of, everyone knows that the land question is the central question of the democratic constitution in South Africa. And because of global pressures, only 30% of the land should be 93% of the land, later 87% of the land was taken, but only 30% should be restored to the South African Africans. It's the South African Constitution. And there are three types of land, and a major difference here that I've learned, and that's the nicest thing of moving from Brazil to here. In Brazil, we call it agrarian reform. That's the reform of farming area, productive areas. Land reform is not the same. And here comes a very important thing. Uh, uh, the first two is land restitution for the ones who lost their lands after the Land Act in 1930, the 13. And the other one is land redistribution. And these two are meant to restore property rights to land. And land is property. Land is value. But the third branch of the land reform in South Africa is what's called land tenure reform. And I think that's the place where land can exist otherwise than property, property rights. And especially in this third branch, the main members of the landless movement in South Africa were what is called here in South Africa as labor tenants and farm dwellers. For a long time, I've been using these categories in my own work. But what's the problem with these categories? What is a labor tenant? It's someone who is dependent and subordinated to someone who gives them labor, opportunities and jobs. What is a farm dweller? Someone who lives in a farm and is dependent on the patriarchal and the private property rights of the owner. So the people who are in our politics and were behind the politics of the landless in South Africa, they were merely dependents. They are described as a secondary category. And of course, who is the central category for their existence? The white, the apartheid laws, the Western dominance, and the farmers. Yeah, this is not my proper slide, but is the farmer is the agent here. The farmer is the one who subordinates the other. So we are never talking about the real people. We are only talking about their own subordination. And to conclude, I must say, I got to mention this book. I don't know Umbuso Ekosi. I never met him, but it's the best book I ever read about the land question in South Africa. This book came out 2 years ago. This potato look like humans. I won't talk about the book, but you must read it because he makes people work, black people, and that's the thing, black people who live in white farms as real interlocutors and real, I don't like the word, but subjects of knowledge. And he described them as, in our theories, as people with living in ontological no-awareness, because they have no place. And I'm taking this, they have no place either in theories and of course in the world, because they live in the white farms. And I'll get to this point now. Now I'm going to talk about this guy, Mangaleso Shadrach Lubega. He was one of the main leaders of the LPM by then when they began my research. And I didn't mention here at the beginning, but I've been doing the research with Antônia Borges, who is here, not here today, but we have been doing this research together for a long time. And he was our host in KwaZulu-Natal for this long time. Mangaleso, when I met him, was the leader of the movement. He was born in this white farm, where he was living for the whole time. His grandparents, his parents, himself. He was born here, he lived in these mud houses, and he was part of the movement. Long story short, in 2008, he was able to get compensated because of the labor reform process. He got some land somewhere else, 10 kilometers away from his original site. So he got a house, a piece of land that would be, in the Brazilian case, that would solve all problems because he got land. But he didn't want any he wanted a very specific land and he had a connection with a certain very specific land, piece of land. Here is something that we have been doing with him for this long time. We have been attending burials of farm workers, labor tenants who live in white farms, and what the movement did, occupy the farm just to make right to the people to bury their relatives in the same land where they live. The farmers, the white farmers, don't want people to be buried in those places because it marks a place, it promotes them as right and includes them in a sort of assembling a proof of having land rights. Well, and this one is Mangalisa's own burial. So I've been working, and that's very important in terms of research. I've been working with the same people and with the same person from 2008 to 2023. And I came all the way from Brazil to attend his burial because in those other pictures, he was always in these places shouting and forcing the farmers to accept the burials. When he died, he had a place, a modern place, a compensated farm. That was not the farm where was he living. But, and that's the thing, after the burial ceremony was held in this compensated house, but as soon as it ended, I'll try to play a video here. I don't know if it's. Turn the lights. He's leaving the farm he got from the government. That's the way out of the farm. So this will be short. And that's the whole way from the farm he got from the government to the white farmers' lands where all his ancestors were buried before. So they managed to negotiate with the farmer. Even having the land he got back, he managed, and his family, they managed to get him buried. And of course, most of his children had passed away. All his brothers, and almost all his brothers and sisters, his grandparents are buried there. Those mud houses that from the beginning, they no longer exist. This is just a white farm now. But he kept, and he have a house, and he kept what is called, the ones who know this, home in Isizu. That is a place where you lie, a place where you become an ancestor, a place where your family goes to get guidance in life. That's Mangalisa's grave. And finished, and that's my point is, most of the things and the few things I have written, I would always call him a farm dweller, a labor tenant, a social movement leader, and he's all of these things. But he's not only a farm dweller. He's not only dependent on the farm. He's not only dependent on private property. He was a taxi driver also. In Johannesburg. He was a church preacher. He was a Swazi in the Zululand. He was, for a short time, he was an ANC counselor. He was a soccer star. He played, and I've written in Portuguese about these things, but once I was very sociologically asking, but how do you learn to lead the movement? And have you learned from your parents? No, I have learned from the soccer. I was a soccer player. And you know nothing. He said, you know nothing about me, and you're right about me. And he was not a landless, only a landless. He was all these things. So, and now he exists and is relevant to us because he's in the social sciences, because he's also as an ancestor to his children and his grandchildren who always come to that grave. That already went, it was 2 years ago when he passed away, to bring him back to the place and to the traditional house where they perform their rituals in not the white farmers' land, but in their own land. So Katide is his praise name. And I think I would be glad if at the end of this book, I make him exist as Katide, a farm dweller, a land dweller, not a farm dweller. Someone who has a land and a home and a house, because it's not just the fact that he got the permission of the white farmer to be buried there, but the fact that his children will get a place to rest and to move. So, thank you so much. That's his taxi, just from the 90s. During the wars in Johannesburg, he was a taxi driver, and this taxi was burned at a certain moment.
Thank you very much, Marcelo, for the amazing presentation. And I'm going to open now for the floor to, if you have questions, if you want to comment on something, if you want to debate something. So please, Tina.
Thank you, Marcelo. I have a question. You want to represent him as, I forget the name. No, his name, Katide. A land dweller, but then at the end it says the white farmer's land. And I was wondering if you would think about changing the white farmer's land to something else, because the fact that he's buried there means it's his land, right? So that's my question. So, yes.
Thank you so much for that insightful presentation. I just had a question about the term non-white women that you used in the slide. Did you deliberately use non-white? Because it was quite a number of times. And why is that? Makes the assumption that the standard is white and whoever is not. Did you deliberately not say black women? That's what I wanted to understand. Thanks.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Hi, thank you for the presentation. I have two questions. One is, in the 20 years of your coming back and forth with South Africa and Brazil, have you had a reflection space for you as a person? Because I think in one of the presentations you were saying that we have to be the subject of our own studies, which Freda Kahlo often says, I am the subject that I know best, and that's why I'm interested in my painting. So something about that, if you're thinking about, becoming your own subject, have you tried that? And it could be in the form of methodological reflection or writing up of who you are in the world as you navigate these two worlds. So that's one. The other is, in your analysis of the global north and the global south, there's this persistent binary that I see, very binary thing, and which might be in some ways misleading, because global south is not just as global north is not just one. Often, I mean, even within the context of Brazil and South Africa, it's completely different conversations that are happening. So that in itself disrupts the sameness or the entrapment into getting into homogenizing a group. I think it disturbs that. So maybe to say a little bit about it, because I fear that, for example, you say there is no land or a dependent hegemony. And then in the narrative, what is being missing is there is no minority group in the world. They are minorities. There is no minority or marginalized group. They are minoritized deliberately through the system, no? So giving back accountability to the oppressors would be part of the work. I didn't see that.
That's I'm here for that. Like to get attention by this but wonderful questions as you made. Tina, I think let's as I said, it's the white farmer's land, and I completely in terms of the I think it's a sociological thing. Whose property is that? Is the but and that's the I think the land is not the same land. The idea of the land is not the same. The farmer owns certain. I don't know how to say that in English, but a perimeter that has fences and what Mangaliso claimed and his family, and of course, most of the farm and farm dwellers and labor tenants in South Africa, what they claim. They claim a place for their ancestors. And this is not a land for agriculture. And I think you helped me with this idea that, and it must be more clear about these things, that is the white farm, but it's not the white land. And because land, and I think that's a very good expression that other colleagues that work that it's not my invention, but in this case, land is home. It's not a property. And that I hope in the book I can make it even more clear to explain these things. But that's land as home is not a farm. And I think that's the most wrongful thing of agrarian and land reforms in the world, is to translate land claims as farm claims. It works for politicians, but doesn't work social policies, but doesn't work for the people. And that makes it, he could get, and he would be, in the Brazilian terms, he would be happy with getting the other farm. He would be restituted in terms of rights, but he would lose the connections with his own ancestors. So it won't solve the problem. Well, that's the thing. That's where I say that through him, and I hope in the book to work through him to make that land exist. Otherwise, to change the problem, the subject. The non-white women, and that's something because some of these authors, like Lorenzo Dua, Silvia Kusikanki, they in their own countries. Lorenzo Dua is a Mexican-American author. Kusikanki is a Bolivian author. And in Bolivia, Kusikanki will never refer to herself as Black, but as indigenous. And then I'm using non-white to bring together Black and indigenous, which here are the same. But in some countries, even in Brazil, it's not the same. So I think that's the idea that non-white people are always badly represented and encompassed by only by the difference. And my term is not good at all. So they are non-white. It still makes the whites too relevant. And that's an important point that I will try to avoid in the book. And the same with the binary thing of global south, global north. I've been, of course, most of the time I've been, and I say strategically using the steps. But because I'm not sure about you, and you can say it's different. But when you say global north, it's a small bunch of people we have in our minds and our lives. And it's just strategically, it's basically the majority of the world against a tiny minority of the world that rose. And of course, and I don't have the problem that this majority rose the globe economically. We have to challenge that. But to roll the world intellectually, that's my point. And so this is just performative to say global south, global north. But of course, and as I said, learning through the global south, I've learned about the difference. I came here to help the landless with Brazilians. And Brazilians, they got to know, but the landless, they are different. And they run away to Mozambique because in Mozambique, it was more connected to something that they could, the Brazilian landless, they could not relate to this sort of loss, the MST especially. And about my own positioning, and I think that's what I've learned in 20 years of research in South Africa, that I never got to learn as an academic in Brazil, that I was a white male voice. And I will always be. But I always say that, you know, for most of you here, it can be seen as just a silly thing. But academics like me in Brazil, white people are like 95% of the academics in Brazil. It's so natural for us to be a white person in Brazil and to roll intellectually and to compare the others to us, that we never think about ourselves as blacks, but we think about the others as blacks, as indigenous. And coming here, and thanks to Mangalis, and of course, many other people, academics from here, from UCT, and many other colleagues, I got to learn that I was a white person. And I got to learn, and of course, this positioning, like, when I'm saying we should challenge social scientists and social sciences is a challenge to myself. Because these things, especially like this gender and racial things, are incrusted in the way we perceive them. And they will always be. And I think the good part of Oyeronke's work is that there will never be, and that concept of Fiat uses, there will never be any comparative existence of a woman and a man in the Yoruba world. And we should think, and I got to learn that I cannot just come here as an academic, and when I got to learn my first lessons from Mrs. Zulu, I got to learn that they will always ask Mangaliso and the other people that were introducing us, that who are these evil people? The whites who are coming with you. And then I always had, and myself and Antonadia and many of my students who came here, we have to learn that before coming to a place, we had to excuse ourselves and to make people understand that even white men should exist or should learn to exist otherwise. So that's, I think, that's my own. But, you know, as I've been learning at home, men take a lot to learn, especially white men.
Okay, wonderful. So we can take another set of questions. Alison, I saw you.
Yeah, I'll use this mic. I think it's
Okay.
Thank you so much, Marcelo, for your wonderful presentation. The idea of land as a place for rights and rituals is very much on my mind. It's what we spent the morning talking about. And I was curious about the various kind of practices and knowledges that, so besides, I think you mentioned the rites and rituals around death and burials. But besides those, were there any other ways of kind of practices and knowledges that demonstrated this intimate relationship between land and earth for the people that you from research?
Dulcie?
I'm very touching with talking to my work. But I think that this issue of relaxation is extremely relevant. Especially if you consider that even when we mention Pan-Africanism, it's not absolute as part of political sciences or science. It's here to like people let them do their thing, let's discuss with them, but it's not incorporated. The same thing with most of the systemic traditional knowledges, except for the drugs and pharmacy and those sciences that we take the power and take, get from that knowledge, not even to exist. Right? So I ask you, where exactly is debate on global south and global north? For many of us who are working with also the Sociology, there is decolonization and the decolonization stories. Global north, definitely, when we're talking about global north, we're talking about the colonizers. We're talking about real power. We're talking about the management of the capital. And we're talking about the management of the world's knowledge. Mm-hmm. So I would like you to go a bit more further about it, because this work also proposes inclusion and level, putting at the same level all those different matrixes of knowledge. So I'd like you to talk a bit more about it, please.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed the opening part of your presentation about challenging the social sciences. And I'm wondering if you're looking at all at the historical experience in Africa of attempts, for example, at the University of Dar es Salaam in the 1970s, the so-called Mandani affair here at UCT, which, by calling it Mandani affair, it's personalized and the real issues get to some extent put aside. But my question is, what about the hegemony of English? What about the linguistic hegemony? Knowledge in the international journals is knowledge expressed in English, which in itself marginalizes knowledge produced in Portuguese or in French or German or other languages. In Mozambique, the academic career now requires effectively that Mozambican social scientists publish in English, which means that only their colleagues who are fluent in English have access to the research produced in the country itself.
We can take the line, we can have 4 questions, and then because after that we're going to close.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Marcel. I was just thinking the last comment that it's interesting that Portuguese is now, if you use the term indigenous language, it's a bit so that's in that imaginary that is put that fact that other languages that was articulate in that language. That's how deep the violence is, but I mean, one question is like what to do with Marxism. I remember having this debate, this discussion in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, like what to do with Marxism. Is it possible that Marxism is a distraction? And again, it's just a provocation, because you're talking about theory, how to think differently. How do we think about that outside of Marxism? Why I'm saying this is the way in which one is entrapped in level and level relations. I was in a meeting the other day, and the whole talk was a lot about how we have to do differently, but it couldn't go outside of the fact that we could not think about a future without work. So it's just a future of work. So the idea that work might be the problem, and producing a lot of this academic, lots of stuff that we can't use, but of course we need equal rights, we need better working rights, etc. But I mean, we're going to destroy the planet because we need to have lots of people working. So is it possible, especially in relation to that, that, you know, Marx is a kind of a distraction? So that's one. And the other is really, I think it's linked to the thing about ontological, the ontological project that you have, which I had come across this concept when I was thinking about the insecurities of whiteness itself, and the kinds of anxieties which is pushing what we experience today and for long. And this beautiful concept, ontological insecurity. And I'm wondering, in terms of this ontological nowhereness, and the fact that we cannot think without centering something. Because why should, so-called indigenous knowledges be included, you know, in the mainstream? Why are we so desperate that it should be part of it, you know? Why is it that it's always a suffix, an affix, and something? Why are we fighting so hard that, you know, Black people must be part of this thing? Why are we fighting Black people thinking must be part of it? Isn't that the problem? That we are desperately spending time to want to be accepted instead of just having to go on working with the knowledge that we have. A few years back, Osman Sembeni had been asked, you know, do you think your films will be accepted by the French government? And he so famously said, he doesn't really care about French because Paris is a suburb of Dakar, you know, and not the other way around. So why are we so seeking so desperately to be a suburb of Europe, you know?
Thank you, Divine. I'm gonna begin from your question because I think that it would be easy to address the others. And in that book, Potatoes Look Like Humans. That was the first book I ever read on the land question in South Africa that mentions the white anxiety of the farmer. And that the issue, and how the authors can develop the idea that what's the only way the white farmers can secure their existence? Through violence. Because, and that's because violence is congenital to property. And as much as I walk around here in the Cape Townian suburbs and even in farms, there's always that sign, private property. And armed response. Have you read those things? And that's the sign in the book. It's there in the book. It's part of this anxiety. And that's the thing. If you come inside, I can be violent against you. That's my right. And the way he works in of course in settler colonized countries. This is what make the whites legitimate. They have the right to be violent in their own properties. So that's now they have to. In South Africa, there is the debate on expropriation bill and all these things, and it's all about. You see the anxiety. Have you realized that? And of course, I was really surprised at what's the main guy from DA place in the government? Agriculture. So this is because even for the whites, the land is very important. Not the same land. And that's a clash. I would call it an ontological clash. That won't be solved by a national union government or a democratic government, because the language of democracy is the language of the property rights. Lots of people have been writing about these things. So we must address it in another way. And I think that's going to the. When I was trying to, and that's, I think it comes together with what Dulce was saying. The problem with that, and there was a thought, and I must say, I must recognize, for a long time, I was reading Boaventura Santos, the Portuguese scholar who is now vanished, but for very good reasons. And I must say, besides all the bad things he's done, he inspired most of us to think about, there are other forms of knowledge. And of course, from where were the other forms of knowledge? Africa. So a Portuguese guy was taken from Africa to say there are other forms of knowledge. And we should incorporate them. And I completely agree with you. That's not the issue of incorporate the notion of land, black land, in the notion of the white land. Is to recognize that both exist, but they are different. Knowledge is not the same. They do not have the same purposes. So and of course the feminist debates can also always help us. It's wonderful to have the same rights as the men have. But it doesn't solve the problem. Having the same right doesn't turn you into an equal person. And of course, it works for race, it works for gender. So it's not something, and that's my point. Actually, my slide that had something else, that is to say that it's not about mixing things, bringing them together. There's about one that thinks they exist differently, and to recognize that people they have to. And I'm saying this is not a. I'm not a. How do I say? I'm not suggesting social policies. I think about social sciences. That in social science we can recognize that there are forms of knowledge, but they do not address the same things. As I said, some are appropriated for the pharmaceutical things, but it's not to say that they should be the same. And I've heard from a Brazilian black scholar one of these days that the university will never be decolonized. It's a very sad idea to understand. And I've learned from a colleague here, my good friend that was an African studies professor, Louis semester, who dealt with the Mandani affair many years ago, who wrote about that when the African studies was closed. He went to Brazil and we were very happy about affirmative action at Brazilian University. And he said, I'm not that happy. It was UCT 20 years ago. I was not that happy with UCT because at UCT we are bringing black people to turn them into white academics. The university has to change. And up to the moment, we have seen that besides the fact we have more black people, Africans at an African university, the university hasn't changed. So that's the dilemma of incorporation. We should not trust, and again, the Western ontology to solve our own problems. And I think it would be great if the social sciences could deal with that, even if the solutions are not for everyone. Addressing them, so you know, but I'm part of a collective called Agrarian South. That is made and it was built by a lot of African scholars, Sam Moyo, Issa Shivit from Dar es Salaam. And what I've learned from them is that, and going to the Marxism, of course, there's a pressure issue to solve certain problems. The concentration of the land, of course, all the efforts made by the Dar school, they are actually like Wallerstein, for example. He became a well-known sociologist and no longer is mentioned as part of that school. And that most of his ideas came from collaborations. Himself, Mandani, others, Issa Shivit, I'm getting old and forgetting my own friend's name. Jacques de Fauchon. Some of my friends. and all these people that work together, assembling new ways and Marxist ways by them to understand the world. But then, and I think of course, it addresses certain things of the modern world. We cannot deny that land is property and its value, and people are oppressed because they have no means of production. But as I tried to show you, that land is not only a means of production. And when I was mentioning the notion of coevalence, that's not mine. That land has to be otherwise, even in the Marxist research. And when I will get back to Denise Ferreira da Silva that I mentioned here, and this other Philippine scholar, referred to Ataya. both of them, they have a very ambivalent relation to Marxism. Denise, in her book, she mentions this is the best theory produced in the West. But what's the problem of the Marxism? Marxism has a teleological history, a history of a liberation through reason, class consciousness, and this is a Western design. The one, people that will self-determine themselves. Sorry, but in most of the world, especially in African researchers, we can see people that are not struggling to self-determine. They are struggling to determine themselves with many other things. The idea of self is a problem in Marxism. So there are always the limits, and I think Marxism addresses the Western issues very well, most of the cases, but does not address. And I think Denise makes, and we can explore it at the end of the year, but the two huge critiques to reason and history as the tools of Western domination in the social sciences. And who is here that will not rely in history? And who is in the forefront of history? Never the South, never us. There was a couple of anthropologists from South Africa who wrote a book about theories of the South. And what would the South be in the forefront? Because the South was so messy and bad that would meet what was the bad things that were happening in Europe 20 years ago. I don't want to be described as the example of the bad things that are happening to the world.
Alison's question.
Yeah, so sorry, I was looking.
Yes. And you have like 1 minute to address.
Yeah, sorry.
We have time to chat.
Yeah, we have to chat. And then that's the thing. Part of this thing to understand land is to describe the everyday life of this land. And just an example, like when I was traveling the whole country with the delegation of the MST guys from Brazil and the Landers. And out of a sudden, we were like in the middle of the Eastern Cape, and Mangalisa would have to travel for the whole night to get to this place, and the Brazilians would be really upset, but we have an appointment tomorrow. And I said, yeah, but I have a ritual at home, something I have to do to my wife who passed away in a taxi accident some years ago, some time ago. And for the Brazilian, that was unimaginable. Rituals must wait. We have a political meeting. And I'm not saying that the rituals are the same as political meetings, and that's very important. Like, but we can talk later.
Okay, so thank you very much, Marcelo. We all give him a round of applause. And Marcelo is going to be here until the end of the year, so yeah, we can always, go and knock on his door and ask him questions. Okay.